And welcome once again to My Life as a Critic. My name is Sean Patrick. I am a professional film critic now of going on, 8 years? 7 years? 7 years. 7 years. And this show is all about me looking back at my own work and, criticizing myself for my own reviews. Looking back and making sure that I was fair in those reviews and that the reviews were well written. And I've found oftentimes that I rush. I want so much to get my ideas and the review out that sometimes I would just rush too much. And my older reviews, sometimes they're okay. Sometimes I wish I would have had the maturity to stop and look back and kind of hold up a little bit and really work on the ideas and especially on the construction, because as I found in the last episode, which is talking about No Country for Old Men, when I rush and when I put out a review that even of a movie I like and have a lot to say about, I can still find myself muddling my own ideas and my own words. And when you're working without an editor and you're working without a net, as I was, it's not uncommon. And certainly, if I want to be fair to myself, I think it's understandable. But at the same time, for me, when I ask so much more of movies, I need to ask so much more of myself, and I should have been asking more of myself when I was publishing some of the things that I published, like that No Country for Old Men review. But thankfully, this show, that's another great thing about the show, is gives me another chance to kind of redo it. And this week, I'm going to redo a review of a movie called Suspect Zero, because I picked these things at random. I picked my old reviews at random, just sort of out of a file I have on my computer that I've been compiling, trying to go back through archive.org and find all these old places where I used to write and find the old reviews that I'd written. I pick them at random, and so I never know which movie it is going to be, and whether or not I'll be able to get my hands on it even. So it can be quite a process. But this week again, I keep doing that. Like it's a weekly show. I've been doing this almost every day for a little while now. This is 10 episodes in here, in about 10 days. But YouTube, it's all about content, man. I picked this one at random today from 2005 about a thriller called Suspect Zero, starring Aaron Eckhardt and Ben Kingsley. I will first read you my review completely unedited, completely from where I wrote it, which was, I believe at the time, this must have been in between writing for GuessTheGross.com and SmartPopcorn.com, smart-popcorn.com. Couple of amateur websites that I wrote for years ago. So I would probably put this on my personal blog at the time. I had my own one of those blog sites, whichever one of those blog sites. There were millions of them out there. I had my own, and I wrote on it, and I would use these as a template for my radio reviews that I began about this time. So here it is, Suspect Zero from 2005. Remote viewing is something fans of late-night radio host Art Bell are very familiar with. The CIA is rumored to have used remote viewing to locate dangerous criminals until the concept was found to be unreliable. Remote viewing is essentially a psychic phenomenon. Viewers claim to be able to find people using only their mind, describing what they see by drawing a picture with their eyes closed. While remote viewing has been debunked, see Penn and Teller's brilliant bullshit series, it does make an interesting plot for a movie. Suspect Zero, starring Aaron Eckhardt and Ben Kingsley, makes good use of it as a plot point, but a weak performance from Eckhardt is the film's undoing. Eckhardt stars as FBI agent Thomas McElway, recently returned to duty after a suspension. McElway had once been the top guy in the bustling Dallas, Texas office, but now has been busted down to the relatively mundane Albuquerque, New Mexico office. As he's settling into what he thinks will be a pretty dull gig, he gets a big case, a murder that places the body directly on the New Mexico-Texas border. Because the body is on the border, it is a federal investigation. The murder has the telltale signs of a serial killer. numerous markings, a strange symbol, a zero with a line through it, and the victim's eyelids have been cut off. The capper, though, is that like most movie serial killers, the killer has specifically chosen McAway to be his opponent in a murderous game of cat and mouse. But this film is a little more complex than other films of its genre. Our killer, Benjamin O'Ryan, played by Kingsley, has chosen his victims because they are serial killers. One of the victims happens to be the reason why McAway just got off suspension. He attacked the man, and thus that guy got off on a technicality until O'Ryan came along and killed him. The manipulation here is pretty good. You sympathize with O'Ryan because he's killing bad guys. O'Ryan tracks the killers through remote viewing, a skill he developed as an agent of the FBI. O'Ryan believes that McAway may have the gift as well. O'Ryan wants McAway to help him track down a killer he calls Suspect Zero, a killer who has killed indiscriminately across the entire country with no serial pattern. The Suspect Zero, O'Ryan believes, may be responsible for most of the unsolved murders in the country. The film was directed by E. Elias Merhege, whose Shadow of the Vampire was a quiet success back in 2000. Here, his direction lacks the precision of Shadow. He falls way too in love with moving his camera, neglecting at times to secure it before moving it on a dolly, thus the camera shakes to distraction. Merhege uses way too many super tight close-ups, so close you can count nose hairs. Thankfully, toward the end of the film, Merhege's direction becomes tighter and the final 20 minutes get really good. The film's most glaring problem is star Aaron Eckhardt, whose performance is uncertain and imprecise. It may be more of the fault of Zach Penn's script for underwriting the character, but clearly the character is off balance the entire film. The subplot about McAway possibly having the gift of remote viewing is never resolved, though he spends a good deal of energy selling the pain of migraines and visions that accompany the gift. Also, hasn't this guy ever heard of the internet? How is there not one computer in the entire FBI office? There's also a throwaway romantic plot with a former girlfriend and partner played by Carrie-Anne Moss that just seems rote and unnecessary. Who can blame Zach Penn for underwriting Eckhardt's character when Ben Kingsley's Orion is such a great part to write for? Kingsley is becoming known for strong performances in weak films, even earning an Oscar nomination for the overhyped Sexy Beast. He's even not horrible in Thunderbirds, where his righteous overacting is at least worth a few chuckles. Here he's riveting and more than believable as a man who has seen too many horrible things. There's something so seedy and yet appealing about vigilante justice. You can't say it's okay to kill people, but when Orion comes upon a serial rapist, he beats the hell out of him and kills him, and you can't help but pause for a moment and think that's not such a bad thing. I always love movies that test the limits of my morality and sense of right and wrong, and Suspect Zero does that. I wish I could give Suspect Zero a full recommendation. I misspelled the word recommendation, leaving out the E. But that is impossible when the lead character just doesn't work. On the strength of Ben Kingsley's performance and the very good final reel, I can give Suspect Zero a partial recommendation. Well, I certainly don't remember liking this movie as much as I seem to come off kind of liking it in this review. I don't really have much memory of Suspect Zero beyond having written this review of it. It's not a movie that really stood out at the time. It wasn't a hit. It wasn't well liked. I haven't checked Rotten Tomatoes. Maybe I'll do that while I'm watching it, but to see how I don't think it got good reviews. I did check and see that Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars. He didn't care for it either. I'll take a pause now, and I will actually watch the movie again, and we'll take another look at Suspect Zero from 2005. My review wasn't terrible, but I wish I would have gotten, I jumped in on the remote viewing thing, and I wish I kind of would have gone into more about what I didn't like about Aaron Eckhardt. I think that's an underdeveloped idea in the review. But Kingsley, though, that does stand out for me. Kingsley and the morality play stuff. I have always been fascinated by that, too, where a movie makes you sort of question who you are as a person. Like, my favorite example of that is The Talented Mr. Ripley, where Matt Damon is a killer. I mean, he's just an outright killer and more than a bit of a creep. But by the end of the movie, his performance is so compelling that there's a part of you that you can't deny wanting to see him get away, wanting to see him live and thrive. And it's not because the character played by Jude Law or Philip Seymour Hoffman are terrible people. I mean, they're kind of jerks, but they're not awful people. They didn't deserve what happened to them in the film. but you can't help but just be compelled by Damon and that desperate, sad longing of his, and especially when you find out that he's a closeted homosexual who's finally, for the first time in his life, found acceptance and happiness. Your heart goes out to him. At the same time, you have to remember he's a killer. That movie is absolutely brilliant for the way it toys with your morality. I don't think Suspect Zero has had quite that level of depth, but I do like the idea of a killer killing serial killers. I mean, which is probably the only thing that this was probably the only real idea this movie had. Suspect Zero, but of course it had Ben Kingsley's performance. But I'll actually take another look at it right now, and obviously I'll tell you whether or not there was anything more to it. Like I said, my memory of it isn't very good, so maybe this could be the first time where I don't know, come out changing my mind and come out thinking differently about the film. But I'll pause now to watch Suspect Zero, and when I come back, which will be no time for you because of, well, editing, we'll talk more about Suspect Zero and about my review on My Life as a Critic. Biggest takeaways from watching Suspect Zero again, is that it's a surprisingly watchable movie. The story proceeds in a pretty logical fashion. You have to buy into the idea of, at least in the universe that the film creates, the idea that remote viewing is a real thing. And as long as you buy into that, this is actually a pretty watchable film. The film definitely held my attention, and Ben Kingsley's performance is very compelling. He is really, really intense and in a very creepy and convincing way. He plays this remote viewer, Benjamin O'Ryan, who tracks down serial killers and kills them, and righteously so. And it's very compelling what he does. As presented by Elias Merhaig, the director, it is kind of... I'm not sure how to describe the direction, because at times the direction is a little bit goofy. At times some of the ideas are a little bit goofy. The way that remote viewing is presented with this sort of red-tinted handheld camera can be... But it goes in and out. Like sometimes you'll be seeing a perspective that seems like the remote viewing perspective, but it's not in that red tint. Now, Eckhardt's character also has this power of remote viewing, although he's been trying to deny it. He has it, and when he uses it, his is more of a scratchy black and white picture as opposed to Orion's red. But then again, the two are so confusing at times that you don't know who's viewing what, even with those filters applied, because sometimes there's a couple scenes where it seems like we're in the perspective of remote viewing, but neither of the guys are using seem to be using their powers. Neither the filters, the specific filters that the director uses to differentiate their visions aren't in place. So it gets a little odd and more than a little bit confusing. The Suspect Zero is a theory that the Ben Kingsley character has, the Orion character. He believes there is a killer who has become the ultimate serial killer, who travels the country murdering people, and that if he can, it's his life's goal to capture this one guy who has no modus operandi, no specific way of killing. He kills indiscriminately, and it makes him much more difficult to track even for someone with the extraordinary talents of the Ben Kingsley character. The killer does have an actual modus operandi, however, in kind of a failure of the film's idea. The character drives a truck, which would seem to be rather obvious, really, when you think about it, when you have to consider the kind of profession that would allow somebody to travel the country as a serial killer and maintain a life. They would have to have the kind of thing that allows them to travel a long ways, and the ability to transport bodies, or at least make them disappear in a fashion that no one ends up finding them. Driving a truck, especially a refrigerated truck, as this character in the end does, makes a lot more sense, and it kind of makes you wonder when you look back on the film just how silly the idea is that it took this long for Kingsley's character, who's an expert in serial killers, because he gets literally inside their head and sees what they see and is able to envision what they do before they do it, you'd think that he would have the notion of a refrigerated truck long before he actually does. That said, there are a lot of refrigerated trucks on the road moving worldwide. Picking out which one is the one that the serial killer is driving certainly couldn't be easy, but at the same time, the idea of the truck shouldn't have been introduced as it was, seemingly that he sees a truck passing by on the highway one time, and it kind of hits him that maybe it's a maybe this particular killer drives a truck. I mean, I think that would have been one of the first things that the Kingsley character would have thought of, and that he had been looking for truckers his entire life. Instead, he kills a traveling salesman who, kind of a regional guy that he thinks might be Suspect Zero, but in the end, he'll figure out it's not. And then that's when he realizes he needs help. That's when he recognizes that McAway, the character played by Eckhardt, may be also a remote viewer, and that with his help, he could actually almost increase his power of his mind by using McAway's mind, which is an idea that is kind of touched upon, but not really. I really have to infer to get to that idea. So I'm inferring that's what the Kingsley character is up to, is that he's trying to use his power trying to enhance his own mental power, his own remote viewing, by accessing the mind of McAway, who also has the talents of a remote viewer but doesn't use them. It's it's not a terrible idea. The idea of a serial killer who kills serial killers. This movie predate? No, this movie was taking place at the same time Dexter was also taking place. Dexter was a pretty good show, but I don't know how many serial murderers are there in one place in Miami. At least the Kingsley character is going around the country killing serial killers. Dexter had to wait for them to arrive in Miami before he could do anything about them. Which is kind of a flaw I don't think anybody ever talked about in that series. Like, just how dangerous is it to live in Miami? How many serial killers are operating there at a run time? But the character, Kingsley's performance is good. The direction at times, like I said, is goofy. This isn't a good movie. It's a movie with some good ideas and a really strong Ben Kingsley performance, but when you break it down into its pieces in terms of its plot, even as logically as it progresses, and even as it is a very watchable movie, it goes by and it has a good pace and interesting twists and turns. When you take it apart afterwards, you realize that the parts don't all fit together. The puzzle doesn't fit together. Like, the characters have to be a little bit dumber than really what they should be, and I keep coming back to the idea that how come it took just seeing a semi-truck drive by for him to get the idea, hey, it's a semi-truck driver. Just seems like the most obvious thing when you get to the end of it. So returning to my review, I was in the middle in my review when I wrote it. I came down kind of in the middle of a partial recommendation of Suspect Zero, and I can see how I got there, because it is, like I said, a very watchable movie. It's not as bad as a lot of the thrillers that came out at around a similar time. Taking Lives would be one that comes to mind immediately. It's a bad movie. And there are others that were Twisted, I think, with Ashley Judd, was another one that's just kind of a bad serial killer kind of thriller. This one isn't as bad as those movies, but again, it lacks in such necessary ways. I mean, they kind of keep going back to the goofy, the semi-truck thing, which should have been it should have been the most obvious thing to these guys, and ends up being the least obvious thing. But I think the movie isn't that bad. It's not terrible, and I can see where I came to the end, where I came up with a partial recommendation of the movie. But I can also say that, I mean, this is not a movie you need to rush out and see. I can understand giving it a partial recommendation, because Kingsley is really compelling, but Suspect Zero in the end, I mean, you kind of when you get away from it immediately after the movie, when you're kind of putting it together afterwards, it does go to pieces. But while you're watching it, it's pretty compelling. I mentioned in the review how Aaron Eckhart's role is a little bit underwritten, and his performance is the weakest point in the film. I don't think it's as weak as watching it a second time, I don't think it's necessarily a weak performance, but it is a somewhat underwritten performance. And the character, the way he's kind of denying that he has the gift, and you've got that the character Henry Lennox plays a character, his boss, who refuses to see the truth about Orion being a former FBI agent, or that he's tracking down serial killers. They don't really establish why. He's just that sort of angry, officious character who has to be against the good guy, and that's kind of a really dull character to put in a movie. It's far less interesting to me, and he's just a roadblock to driving the plot. That's really all he is just this unnecessary roadblock that the film puts in. But I do think that the character of McAway is a little bit underwritten, and it requires a lot from Eckhardt to kind of exert a lot of energy as McAway in order to get you to be compelled by him as a character, as opposed to giving him a little bit more to do. Even as he is the center of the film, he does come off as a bit of a cipher, especially when you put him up against Kingsley's performance, which is so driven and intense. Like I said, my review was pretty accurate. It wasn't filled with really any terrible errors. I didn't when I watched this time, I didn't really get into the morality aspect of Kingsley's performance. Like, you're not necessarily, you're pretty much clearly on Kingsley's side. He's killing serial killers, so you're with him. But the film doesn't ask the really forceful question. It doesn't put the audience in a position to have to ask themselves what they would do. And that would be much stronger, I think, if the film really had put you in a situation where you had to make that decision. What would you do if you were him? Would you support him doing what he's doing? Or would you be on the side of right and say, yeah, serial killer or not, you're not allowed to kill people, which is, I mean, where we all are supposed to come down. But when a movie is good enough to force you to ask that question and put you in a difficult situation and make a difficult decision, I think it's a far more compelling idea than what is presented in Suspect Zero. In my review, I said that question was there. But the second time through, I don't sense that question. I don't sense the importance being placed upon that. Kingsley is not necessarily portrayed as a hero throughout, but he's not played. They don't toy with him as a potential. They don't toy with him as an actual villain all that much either. So that kind of it's a little too muddy to really center on actually asking that moral question. I think in my original review, I really kind of inferred that idea as a way of kind of explaining why I kind of liked the movie, which I do kind of like the movie because it proceeds in a very watchable manner. Good pacing. It's not a bad-looking movie at all, and Kingsley's performance is very good. But I can sense in my review that maybe I was searching for a better reason to find this movie compelling, instead of just coming down on the side of it being just mediocre yet watchable, which is really what Suspect Zero is. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of My Life as a Critic. I'll pick another movie at random tomorrow, and we'll continue talking about my career and my old reviews, and revisiting these movies anew. I'm a professional film critic, Sean Patrick, and thank you for listening.